Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 7th of September. I'm Erin Viner. This is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. We open at the Knesset, which is continuing its deliberations at this hour over the controversial natural gas deal being pushed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It remains unclear whether the plenary will hold a vote on the issue, as the coalition is still struggling to secure the necessary majority for the agreement to pass. For the plan to be implemented, Minister of Economy Aryeh Deri needs to exercise his authority to circumvent the antitrust commissioner, a position which is currently left vacant, who is traditionally required to sign off on the deal. Because Deri has refused to do so, saying that he prefers to wait for the appointment of the next commissioner, the government is now seeking to transfer his authorization to the cabinet. Most opposition factions, including Israel Beiteinu, have announced their opposition to that, although the Joint Arab List faction says that it would support the transfer. The defense establishment is preparing for the possible escalation of violence following today's funeral of Riham Dawabsha, the 27-year-old Palestinian victim of the Duma arson attack who died of her injuries overnight. Sporadic disturbances erupted near the site of the firebombing in the West Bank village, where several Palestinians hurled rocks at Israeli vehicles, causing no reported injuries. Dawabsha had been hospitalized at the Sheba Medical Center at Tel HaShomer since July 31st after suffering burns over 90% of her body in the attack by suspected Jewish extremists that also killed her 32-year-old husband and 18-month-old son, Ali. The couple's surviving 4-year-old son, Ahmed, is still fighting for his life at the hospital, where physicians say that his condition has somewhat stabilized. Hamas vowed to avenge the Duma murders and called for a day of rage throughout the Palestinian territories. So far, no one has been arrested in connection with the arson. An extensive shakeup in the police force is expected in the coming months following the publication of the results of an internal investigation of the July stabbings at the Gay Pride Parade in Jerusalem. 7 police officers will be removed from their posts for failure to prevent the fatal attack. We get more in this report from IBA's Dennis Zinn.
There was a grim mood this morning at the Police High Command celebration for the new year. Many of the officers present believed that the results of the investigation regarding the Gay Pride attack were too severe. The investigation committee recommended taking steps against 10 officers and a border policeman who were all found to be directly involved in the failures, which resulted in the murder of high school student 16-year-old Shira Banki and the wounding of 5 others. Committee members said that the police failed to act on intelligence warnings that were available regarding the threat presented by Yishai Schlissel, who had recently been released from prison after serving a 10-year sentence for a similar attack at a gay pride parade. Acting Police Chief Ben Sisao adopted the recommendations, but with reservations. At the celebration this morning, he said that it was an incidental slip-up made by a team with an exceptional record of success. He said that the proposed penalties are harsher than those imposed on public servants in other sectors, including the security forces. But Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan, who arrived to wish the police force a good year, said that he fully endorses the sanctions because, he said, that is the only way to amend weaknesses in the organization. Erdan also said that he hopes to complete the appointment of Gal Hirsch as the next police commissioner within the near future. His unpopular choice, coupled with the new shake-up, does not bode well for the stability in the police department in the coming year. Dennis Zinn, IBA News.
Several months after being convicted of accepting bribes and the obstruction of justice, former police superintendent Eran Malka appeared before the Jerusalem District Court for a pre-sentencing hearing. The former top member of the elite Yaha 443 anti-corruption unit had tears in his eyes as he begged the judges to have consideration for his family and his previous contributions to the state, and to hand down a lenient sentence instead of the minimum of 10 years imprisonment requested by prosecutors who described his actions as treasonous. The senior police investigator signed a plea bargain agreement in which he admitted to systematically leaking sensitive information about police investigations to attorney Ronel Fisher, who then offered it to his clients in exchange for bribes that he shared with Malka. The disgraced officer told the court that he was ashamed of his conduct, for which only he is responsible, and that he even contemplated suicide. Malka's official sentencing is set to take place on the 20th of September. Turning now to the migrant crisis in Europe, in Greece, where a record 50,000 people have come so far this year. Authorities are now bringing Syrian refugees who managed to make the perilous journey to Lesbos island by boat to the mainland. Some of the 2,500 passengers aboard one ship are describing appalling conditions and even police violence.
Very bad life in the camp, in the port. The police like catch, like kill, like push. We have a woman in my family. She has baby.
Pregnancy.
The police, push her and all of bad thing from the police.
You don't have any comfort for people. No WC, no water, no light, no the round is stone, everything, and out the city. I don't know, many people there, near 6,000. He need the paper, but the government, he didn't make a system to give him an easy idea. You must fight, you must push, you must near die.
We come to small boats, so difficult. It means hundreds, then about 99.5 is dead. But we accepted that to pass it. But Allah help us that we are right now we are alive, and I'm sure that we can get our purpose or aim.
Officials in Macedonia are reporting that over this past weekend, more than 2,000 people, mainly from Syria and Iraq, crossed its borders determined to reach Western European nations. They are mostly streaming in from Greece, and Macedonia is organizing trains to transport them twice a day to its northern border so that they can then cross through Serbia into Hungary, with most insisting that they will keep traveling in hopes of finding a better life in Germany. Many say that their impetus for leaving their homelands is because of the Islamic State, which is called Daesh in Arabic.
Because Germany, very good country, and she's helped Syrian people. Because in our country, war, a lot of war. يعني داعش، جبهة النصرة، جيش الحزب، النظام. Everybody destroy other and destroy us.
Some of people go to Germany because they wanted some money, because they're poor also, and the others going for study and work, and the other goes to help our families and children and wives and women and others. For me, I will go to Finland because my friend, my family is there. Also, I want to study in pharmacy because I was in Iraq study for engineering, but when come IS, they stop studying, and this is my life. It's miserable.
The last leg of the refugees' journey before reaching the European Union's Schengen passport-free zone is Serbia's crossing into Hungary, where officials intend to clamp down on the unremitting human tide washing over the borders. At least 1,200 refugees have been herded past 4-meter-high fences topped with razor wire into the newly built alien holding center erected in the area just a few days ago. Budapest's right-wing government of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has been one of the most vociferous critics of the mass migration and is vowing to eliminate illegal border crossings by next week with a new 175-kilometer-long barrier, tough laws, and the deploying of the army. Migrants will be processed at the transit camp, and anyone whose application for asylum is denied will be deported back to Serbia. Some of those housed at the center say that they are encountering unfriendly attitudes from the locals.
We tell them we got money, we need just transport. Nobody, the buses, the taxis refuse to take us. And also the markets refuse to sell us food.
Meanwhile, Austria and Germany are throwing their borders open to refugees. After being stranded for days in Hungary, those fortunate to board trains were greeted with cheers and applause at Vienna's Westbahnhof train station. Meals, fruits, and sweets were handed out to the refugees and their children as they disembarked from the carriages. Other Europeans have been very proactive in actually heading out to pick up the refugees. This convoy of around 190 cars tooted their horns in a show of solidarity as they headed into Hungary to personally bring the migrants back into Austria. The drivers made the journey after answering an appeal on Facebook, with some coming as far away as Slovakia and Germany.
Really important to just give a sign to them that they are welcome and they don't have to fear of Europe, and that especially Germany is a warm country for them, and yeah, that they don't have to fear and that they are safe and that they just don't have to sleep another days and nights on the streets because it's such a horrible thing.
Following a weekend that saw 18,000 refugees enter Germany, Berlin is hoping to speed up asylum and extradition procedures for migrants. During a high-level meeting that lasted for 5 hours, leaders from Chancellor Angela Merkel's governing coalition agreed to allocate 6 billion euros to help federal, states and municipalities with the expenses related to the record influx of migrants. As the 28-nation European Union remains deeply divided over how to cope, former British Foreign Secretary David Miliband is calling on the United States to play a leadership role in the crisis gripping Europe and the Middle East, as well as to accommodate at least 65,000 refugees.
If you're asking, should the United States be playing a role alongside the European Union, my answer would be a very strong yes, and there are two elements to that. First of all, one of the reasons that people are fleeing the Middle East is that the neighboring countries to Syria, that means Lebanon and close allies of the US like Jordan, are creaking under the strain of literally millions of refugees. And secondly, of course, America has historically been the home for refugees, a world leader in refugee resettlement. But over the 4 years of the war, the US has only taken 1,400 Syrian refugees in total. Well, the 65,000 has a very clear logic to it, and the International Rescue Committee, which has resettled new Americans for the last 80 years since we were founded by Albert Einstein here when he came in 1933, we've been clear that for the US to maintain its leadership position in refugee resettlement, it should take about 45 or 50% of the UN recommended number. And the UN has said that by the end of 2016, 130,000 Syrians need to be resettled around the world, and that's why the 65,000 figure is the one for the US to continue to show the kind of leadership that it has over the decades. At the moment, that leadership position has been taken by Germany, because they've clearly said that 800,000 people are going to register for asylum or claim refugee status in Germany this year. It's time for the US, I think, to have the kind of debate about how it can continue its leadership role.
Among the refugees from the Syrian civil war are 500,000 Palestinians, 1,000 of whom have drowned at sea while trying to reach Europe. This according to the Palestinian Forum in Europe, Ziad al-Alul, who also says that around 100,000 of the Palestinians from Syria have managed to reach the continent. Other Palestinians displaced by the conflict have either found refuge in a number of Arab states or relocated to other places inside of Syria. Prime Minister Netanyahu maintains that today's Europe is witnessing what happens when countries lose control of their borders. The premier made the statements while inspecting the beginning of the building of the multi-billion shekel security fence along the border with Jordan aimed at preventing infiltration. Netanyahu added that the combination of terrorism with illegal migration make the barrier imperative. Ground was broken on the first 30-kilometer section of the fence that will stretch between North Eilat and the Timna Park. The project follows the success of a similar barrier along the Sinai border with Egypt and the enhanced security fence on the Golan Heights facing Syria. As he was accompanied by Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon and Transportation Minister Israel Katz, Netanyahu said that the Sinai fence has, for all intents and purposes, stopped the flood of illegal migrants, which is an achievement few countries in the world can match. It doesn't mean that Israel is unsympathetic or indifferent to the human tragedy that's going on, said Netanyahu, going on to claim that the Jewish state was the first country to provide humanitarian aid to those wounded in the fighting with Syria. Joining me now in the studio to discuss the refugee crisis is Rabbi Arik Asherman, who is the president of the Rabbis for Human Rights organization. Thank you for coming in this afternoon.
Thank you.
All right, what is your view about the Prime Minister's stance that basically Israel is simply too tiny to absorb any further asylum seekers?
International refugee law, which we Jews helped write based on our history, does say that countries have a right on the one hand, you cannot close your borders to people fleeing for their lives, and also that you do have a right not to have your country inundated. I think we are far from that. I am embarrassed when I see, with all the difficulties that people are facing in Europe, the images of people going out to welcome refugees, and I wish it were happening here. I think beyond what I could say from our Jewish tradition, simply it's betraying our history when so many times it's we who've had the doors closed to us. We who've been told that we are dangerous, that we are unwanted, that we will endanger a society. We can learn from our history that we only look out for ourselves today, or we can learn from our history as we're taught in Exodus and so many other places. Because we experienced it, we can be different.
What do you make about the argument that because many of these refugees are coming, they are Muslims and are coming from states at which Israel's in a formal state of war, such as Syria, and that they would pose a great security risk to the state of Israel?
Without a doubt, the issue of Syrian refugees is more complex than the African refugees. And without a doubt, we have to think of creative ways and to understand that we have certain risks that maybe we can't take. But for example, I'll give one example. Irwin Cutler, the former Justice Minister of Canada, at one point had said to Israel, "We'll help you out. We will take people that have come to your country, but you have to do something. You have to indicate that you're willing to accept some number of people to stay in your country. You have to do RSD." When our Prime Minister says they're all infiltrators or migrants, we don't know that because we've never properly checked. And you look at the huge difference between the number of people that in our country are given refugee status from the same populations, 2% where 80% for Eritreans in other countries or more. And you have to ask yourselves, what are we basing that on? And if Irwin Cutler said that if we were to do RSD, if we were to give people refugee status when they deserve it, then they could help us out and maybe take some people to Canada. That was a number of years ago. We said no. From my own personal context, I know that there are people today, also other countries, that might be willing to help us out. We could find creative solutions that would allow us not to be closing our borders as borders were closed to us, and not endangering ourselves if we were willing to do something other than just saying, no, you're not coming here.
Rabbi Eric Osherman of the Rabbis for the Human Rights Organization, thank you for being our guest this afternoon, and good luck with your mission.
Thank you.
In other news, the Gaza Strip may be uninhabitable in 5 years' time. That's the finding of a United Nations report based on the premise that current problems in the impoverished and war-ravaged territory persist. The UN's Conference on Trade and Development that issued the publication cited poor water quality, lack of electrical infrastructure, population density, unemployment, and poverty as the main issues. Palestinian officials say that if given a choice, most Gaza residents would leave and go elsewhere because they feel helpless, defeated, and besieged. According to the World Bank, the Hamas-controlled entity now has the world's worst-performing economy with a 43% rate of unemployment. Now, the regional news, Turkish warplanes bombarded Kurdistan Workers' Party targets overnight after the PKK staged a deadly attack, reportedly killing 16 Turkish soldiers near the Iraqi border in the bloodiest assault since the collapse of the ceasefire in July. Ankara says that 2 F-16s and 2 F-14 jets struck 13 PKK sites in retaliation. There were also skirmishes between Kurdish gunmen and Turkish security forces in the eastern town of Cizre, where 2 people have lost their lives in the last 3 days of fighting. The clashes are part of a stream of deadly attacks since July, which officials report have already killed more than 70 members of the security forces and hundreds of PKK fighters. Vandals have spray-painted anti-Semitic and monarchist graffiti on a sculpture at the French Palace of Versailles, including phrases such as "the second rape of the nation by deviant Jewish activism." The 60-meter statue is called Dirty Corner and was designed by Indian-British artist Anish Kapoor, whose mother is Jewish. The work was also the target of vandalism in June, although no anti-Semitic references were involved in that incident. The French Minister of Culture, Fleur Pellerin, describes the latest attack as demonstrating a fascist vision and is promising that the culprits will be brought to justice. The artist has previously acknowledged the sexual nature of the sculpture, which he says symbolizes the genitals of a queen taking power. Many interpret that monarch to be Marie Antoinette, who resided at the Palace of Versailles in the late 1700s. In financial news, the shekel today put in a mixed performance against all major foreign currencies, as did share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. Well, it's very hot outside, and the IBA weather team is telling us to prepare for another slight rise in temperatures tomorrow. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. We hope you'll join us again tomorrow, and I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great evening and shalom from Jerusalem.